Two, one.
And we're live. Hi guys, welcome to Spark 21, our Ireland and Northern Ireland regional conference. The first one in a while for us here. We're very excited to be bringing the conference to you all. We have a fantastic day of events planned for you from now until 6 o'clock this evening. And to kick off now, first we have our panel on reporting news and questioning the government during COVID-19 with our fantastic guests, Aoife Moore from the Examiner, Shamim Malekmian from Hot Press and the Dublin Inquirer, and Sarah McInnerney of RTE1FM. I'll just let them introduce themselves because they'll do a better job at it than I ever could.
Do you want me to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Hey guys, I'm Sarah McInnerney. I'm a broadcaster with RTE. So at the moment I'm hosting a drive time program on RTE. It's called Drive Time. And before that I would have worked across RTE and various different broadcast stations. And before that I would have worked with newspapers, the Sunday Times and the Sunday Tribune in particular.
Do you want to go next, Aoife?
Yeah, my name's Aoife Moore. I work for the Irish Examiner. I've worked there a year next week. It's nearly my anniversary next week on Valentine's.
Fantastic.
Romantic. Yeah, so I was and Belfast. And before that, I worked at the Irish Daily Star on the crime desk.
Oh, perfect. And yourself, Shamim?
So my name is Shamim Malekmian. I cover the immigration beat for Dublin Inquirer, and I do political stories for Hot Press. Before that, I was an environmental journalist for 4 years. And I was also contributing to different papers, Examiner, mostly like writing features for them.
Okay, fantastic. So we have a very wide range, a fantastic lineup on our panel today, and all of our guests have like a lot of experience in the industry, in different areas of the industry. So I'm sure they'll have a lot to say and offer advice to give. So if anyone has any questions during the panel, feel free to either press the little, I think it is a little button that lets you raise your hand, or post or if you don't want to speak, post the question into the chat and we'll ask it. But we're going to kick off with a few questions here now, and just whenever you like throughout the next 50 minutes, feel free to ask a question. So I think it's fitting we go like every interview ever, we go right back to the beginning. So you all have very impressive career records as journalists. But I think like a lot of people listening here, they're either starting out in their career or they're interested in, getting into the industry. So I think we'd all be interested in learning where and how you started out in your early days of your career. And let's do it. We'll go in reverse this time. Shamim, you can.
With me. Okay, cool. So I studied journalism for my undergrad, and from the second semester of the first year, I started pitching my ideas to editors. I started the smallest, kind of silliest ideas that kind of local lifestyle editors would go for. And over time, I felt more confidence to go for more serious stories. And I was lucky enough that some editors took me in, opened my emails, even if I had a foreign name they couldn't pronounce. But I worked really, really hard, even when I was still in college, studying journalism. I traveled across the country for stories. I went on a never-ending bus trip to Galway for a story that never even went ahead. I've had dinner with absolute strangers in the middle of nowhere in rural Ireland as a student. And I never thought, oh, I can do that. I'm just a journalism student. I said, I'm a journalist and there's nothing stopping me from doing what I love doing. And finally, my hard work paid off and got noticed. Here we are today.
I love that point that even though you were just a student at the time, screw it, you were a journalist and you were going to go for it and you were going to, you were going to do it. I think that's a great attitude to have, especially like when you're first starting out, because like obviously like student journalists, they might not have a lot of experience, but they certainly have the talent. I can tell you that. Like, I was the editor of one of the magazines in UCC during my time there, so I know firsthand like the talent coming out of our colleges. It's brilliant. Okay, do you want to tackle that question, Aoife?
Yeah, this probably works for variation. But I think I did everything wrong when I came to university. I did multimedia journalism while I was in Glasgow Caledonian. I started university just as the recession was hitting, and I was absolutely skint, and I always had a part-time job, and because of that I kind of felt a bit in the back foot from other people in my class, because I could unpaid internships, and that was really big in Scotland at the time. Unpaid internships, I couldn't really do any student publications because I was working like non-stop. So when I got out of uni, I kind of really had to bust my arse to do all the things that I should have done while I was at university. But yeah, I think once I left university, I wanted to be a war correspondent. So I moved to Malawi in Southeastern Africa and lived there for 6 months. Obviously didn't do enough research because it's like the most peaceful country in Africa. So bad choice. Worked for a human trafficking charity out there for 6 months, and then came back to Scotland and just started applying for anything and everything. I mean, I was applying for editors' jobs. Like, I would literally send my CV to anyone and everyone. Eventually got a job at a press agency, which are massive in Scotland. They're not as big here, but they're huge in the UK. And it was like really good grounding. Papers often use agencies for the jobs that no one else wants to do. So, you know, you're knocking on front doors of murder victims, you're going to crime scenes and stand there all day in the rain. And at the time, I hated it with a passion, but when you look back now, like, it was the best grounding I think I could have had, you know, doing the kind of dog's body work, because it really sets you up. Like, once you've had the first door slammed in your face, the rest of them are like wee buns, like, you don't worry about it after that. So yeah, I started an agency, and then from then on just did, you know, same as Shamima, just local work, regional work, and just worked my way back home. Got into the Star and kind of just never looked back then. I've done, you know, crime and different stuff, but I'm in politics now, and I don't think I'll ever change. I think I'm in politics for life.
Yeah, you certainly cut your bread and butter with politics this past year, that's for sure, especially with the pandemic on. I love that idea that yeah, you didn't have the chance of getting involved in student media when you were in university, but that didn't stop you later on, like after you were done. I think it's a great idea that, you know, it's never too late to start writing. If you have a passion for it, you want to get involved, then just do it. And like you said, send like 5,000 job applications and get 4,099 rejections until you get the one, and then you're like, yes, yeah, I am a published journalist. Okay, and yourself, Sarah?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't have Aoife's excuse at all, actually, when it comes to why I didn't work in student publications when I was in college, because it was actually because I had no interest in being a journalist at all. I had ended up in the wrong course, really, because I hadn't really read the prospectus right. And all I knew was that I wanted to write because I loved English and I loved fiction. And I thought, you know, journalism, writing, feature writing, it's all the same thing, isn't it? And then I realized, actually, no, it's not. In journalism, it's a completely different thing, obviously. So I spent 4 years in college completely disengaged, really, no interest in journalism, waiting until I could qualify or graduate, and then I was going to do something else. I didn't know what I was going to do, but it was going to be something else. But as part of the course, I had to do a placement in somewhere. So I got a placement in the Sunday Tribune, and I was 2 weeks into the job there, and I realized, oh my God, I love this job. I just absolutely loved it. I just loved, I suppose the reason that I wanted to do writing is because I love telling stories, and I had never really appreciated that that's what journalism is really all about, is telling stories, whether you're writing health or education or crime or any of it, you know, politics, particularly stories about life. And then I realized that's what you're doing. You're bringing people up and you're telling their stories, particularly people, hopefully, who don't have their voice heard. Like, that's what you're aiming to do. So I just got bitten by the bug within 2 weeks of my placement in the Sunday Tribune, and I never looked back really from there. I mean, the Tribune then gave me a job at the end of my placement after letting me go for a little while. They brought me back, gave me a job as a social diarist, which is very far from being a war correspondent, even in Malawi. So
a job that no longer exists as well.
We had very different paths though. So I did that for a year and a half, for my first year and a half in journalism. Now, I was also covering news, which was great. So I enjoyed that part of it, and I did every aspect of news apart from politics. And then at night time, I'd be going out and hanging out with all the Celtic Tiger people, you know, going to Reynards and going to Lily's and drinking lots of champagne. I had a column called Sarah and the City on the back page of the Sunday Tribune. So I was doing that for a year and a half, and then they let me stop doing it because I really, really didn't enjoy it. So the editor let me stop, and I just focused on news. And then I went from there. I got into politics in the Sunday Times, and that's when I was really like, sort of like Aoife, like never look back. Like there's nothing like it. It's just amazing. Covering politics, it's amazing.
Makes it really makes it sound like politics is like the next Hollywood blockbuster action film, and we're all glued to the screen, which I guess for the past year especially we have all been, because there's not much else to do when you're stuck at home. But it's like I love that idea of like I guess some passions, you know, you don't know that you have, you know, early on in life. I don't think any of us really know what we wanted to do when we were like 18 or 19, and we had our guidance counselors telling us that the Leaving Cert is going to determine everything you do in your life, so make sure you know what you want to do right now. I love the idea that that you can, you know, you can develop these passions later on in life, and you can go and do these amazing things. That's just a great message. Okay, now that you got the nitty gritty introductions out of the way, I guess let's get into the the real meat, reporting news and obviously questioning the government during this pandemic, and also outside of the pandemic, and why it's so important. So I was thinking the other day, and like I just I thinking about how news reporters and journalists, they have like one of the greatest responsibilities to deliver information in a clear and unbiased way to people, everyone who's listening, and to the general public. So my first question then is, how do you tackle the responsibility of, you know, delivering this information in like a clear and objective way in your day-to-day work? And I don't know, who would like to start?
I can go first.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I cover the immigration beat a lot, and I come from an immigrant background myself, so I had to navigate the immigration system personally. And I know how bureaucratic and heartless it can be. But obviously, I want the system to improve, and I'm sympathetic to the troubles of people I write about. But I try to approach every story with a clear mind, and I try to as much as I can look at the story from outside. No matter where I go, I always have the National Union of Journalists Code of Conduct on my desk in front of me, telling me I need to report accurately and honestly. And I've even stopped working with a certain group, a great advocacy group, because I found that they have a tendency to exaggerate. So I hopefully that kind of shows that I do respect the right of the people to get the truth, or the most feasible version of the truth, whatever that is. Especially at Dublin Inquirer, we do our best really to not to have our own twists and narratives add to the story, to minimize bias. We have like a special editing process, and we file a story in Google Docs, and 3 people go through them. And if we ask each other a question, we point out if each other's biases, or if we have something in it that's inaccurate. And I'm very grateful that we can do that. And I hope all of you here today, all the people listening, obviously, end up working with editors like that, because there'll be editors who would kind of add stuff to your work. And and you don't want them there. You know what I mean? But if you got stuck in that situation, do your best to file an honest, unbiased report. And if it came out otherwise, and you can't afford to cut ties with them, at least you've done your best.
That's all anyone can really ask of you at the end of the day. If you've done your best, then you can be. If you're happy with it, then your editor hopefully is happy with it as well. I really like that point about vetting every piece and making sure that it's as accurate and as truthful as possible, and that's something we're going to come back. That's a point we're going to come back to a little later on. How about you, Aoife?
Yeah, I think the responsibility thing is something. I think if you've been in journalism for a really long time, like I haven't, but I could see how easy it would be to take it for granted. You get quite used to seeing your name in the paper, and like everything else, you could probably get sloppy. For me, I think the social embarrassment of knowing that I've got something wrong is enough. I just don't want to end up in the Phoenix, so that's the main thing. And I think as well, just you need to always keep in mind who you're writing it for as well. And I can kind of relate to what Shamim was saying as well. Like, you kind of you might use your own background, but you don't write it in a way that you have your bias or whatever. Like, first started at the exam, this is the only way I can really describe it, when I first started at the Examiner, and Sarah can probably attest to this as well, Leinster House is an incredibly male dominated place, and they tend to be a good bit older, and they tend to have quite a lot of money. So quite clearly, this is not something I have in common with male TDs and stuff. And when I started at the Examiner, the very, very start, now I was only there 2-3 weeks when we went into lockdown, but I found that I just didn't have the connections. People, like, there's some journalists who might have went to school with politicians, or they've just known them from a long time, like they're in different circles, they've been in the job a long time, so they have all these connections. And the way I kind of went about it, because I really struggled at the start when they were in programme for government negotiations, there was points where I was like banging my head off a wall because I could not get anyone to answer the phone, and I started really panicking. And I kind of just thought then, you play to your strengths. Like, I don't look like a lot of the TDs, I was really young, why would they answer the phone to me? Why would they spill their guts and leak to me this person that they've never met? So the way I went about it was I just spoke to younger TDs and new TDs. We just had an election, because the way I thought about it was, like, if I don't know what I'm doing, they probably don't know what they're doing either. So I think your own background does kind of mold and shape the way you do the job. But I think it's so important to not let your own kind of biases show. And I think the way we do it in the Examiner, and it used to drive me up the wall, but I'm really used to it now, is when you do a story, someone in the office, whether it's your editor or just one of your colleagues, you have to kind of fight it out. Like, the other person just plays devil's advocate with everything that you say about the story, and they'll say, like, why is this a story? And you'll say, oh, because X, Y, Z, and they just keep coming back with a different excuse over why it's not a story and what has been covered and have you tried this angle. And at the start, it drove me mental because I wasn't used to it. But now, it definitely makes the story better and kind of challenges you a bit more. I think as well, you can't let the voice in your head overcorrect you as well. I think people sometimes, I know I am sometimes, like, worried about if I do this story, for instance, I'm from the north, and if I cover a certain story, the first thing I think is like, oh, I'm going to get so much grief now because I covered the story and I'm from the north, and people are going to assume I have a bias. But you can't overcorrect either. You can't let other people's judgment kind of get in the way that you do the stories too. I feel like I've talked for a really long time, but let's Sarah go.
You can talk as much as you like. We don't have anywhere else to go. But yeah, yeah, that's oh, sorry, I forgot. I lost my train of thought there. But yeah, like I like. Oh God. Sorry. Yeah, I really like that. Like, I guess at the end of the day, you are your own worst enemy, and like, you can tend to, like, I guess, I guess there is a tendency to overcorrect, like, because like you don't want to upset or offend or like get any grief from anyone. But at the end of the day, I guess like it is important, like Shamim said before and you said, to like tell their story like in like the most objective way as you can, but also like, you know, I guess don't betray your own morals whilst you're telling it. Speaking of talking for a long time, I think you do a lot of that on the radio, don't you, Sarah?
Yes, I do indeed. It can be tricky. Yeah, no, I think the ladies have actually covered a lot of the points that I would have made in relation to this. There's a couple of other things that I have learned over the years are really important when it comes to bias and objectivity, because you know, we can only, any of us all ever strive towards objectivity. We can never achieve true objectivity, whatever that is. As Shamim says, whatever the truth is, everybody has their own truth. But one way that I have found is really helpful to do it is to make sure to always read. First of all, you need to be aware of your own biases and what you believe and what, you know, maybe your politics are, what way you might be leaning on a particular issue, particularly if they are, you know, very contentious issues like the abortion referendum, for example, covering that. You need to be very aware of where you're coming from it yourself and not let that, in as much as possible, bleed into your work. And also read the other side. That would be my key tip. Follow the other side on Twitter or social media or wherever they are. So, for example, with Trump, Donald Trump, and the general prevailing attitude most places around the world, you know, that he wasn't the best president, and I'm being very kind here. I think even for us when we were covering it, it was very important for me to follow a lot of Republicans, supporters of Trump on Twitter, read what they had to say, and try not to dismiss it in my head, try and understand where they were coming from. I think it's really important. The same with the abortion referendum. You need to try and understand where all sides are coming from on any particular topic. And that way, at least when you're coming to any topic with your questions or any interview with your questions, I think it really, really helps to have an understanding. And it's not just read it and say, okay, now I know it. You need to understand it. You need to really try to understand it and feel where everybody's coming from a particular issue. So that'd be one of the things that I found really helpful. And then the other thing, and it's sort of a small thing, but it's a big thing. And again, if you're working in a good publication like Aoife and Shamim are, where there's an editorial process where anything that you write goes through various levels, this will happen to an extent automatically anyway. But words matter. And language matters, which seems really obvious. But again, if we go to the abortion referendum as an example of something where biases can be very easily betrayed, what words you use to describe the fetus or the unborn would betray which side of the argument you're coming from on very easily. So because obviously one side would be much more likely to describe the unborn as fetus or the fetus as an unborn. So your publication in a lot of instances will decide on what the house style is on that, or what the editorial decision is, in which words you would use. But if they haven't, then you need to bring that up. And I'm just giving that as an example because it's a really obviously societal and political contentious issue, continues to be, maybe not as much as it was, but there will be other versions of that where language might unconsciously display bias, which will lead to your listeners or readers, some of them, distrusting you if they feel you're bringing too much of your own to it. So they would be my tips and experience on it.
I think there's a lot of value there for student journalists, especially the idea of reading the other side. I think I definitely I'm definitely guilty of finding it quite difficult to do that at times, you know, just because I sometimes let my own biases and my own opinions get in the way of not wanting to read. But I think it definitely makes your work a lot more varied and a lot more objective in objective, because you can bring in, you know, arguments from both sides, and that's definitely just going to make you a better journalist. Reminder to everyone listening that if you want to shut me up for a minute, at any point you can ask a question. Just raise your hand and or send an emoji and we'll unmute you. Actually, someone's looking to ask a question as I speak. Ian, one sec. Do you want to unmute him there, Ben? Oh, there you go. Hey, Ian, go ahead and ask the question.
Yeah, so well, first of all, I love all of your work. I follow you all, and like, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. It's really interesting as a journalist in my position. And so for myself, when I was doing my undergrad, I didn't participate in journalism at all. And then I actually went to do a master's, but I did it outside of Ireland. And now I've moved back. And so I'm just I feel like I'm starting from base zero on like building up my contacts and things like that. I was wondering, how did you guys do it, especially maybe Aoife, seeing as you studied in Scotland and then came back to Ireland? Like what advice would you have?
I'm the resident blow-in of the Zoom. Yeah, when I was in Scotland, I then left because obviously I hadn't been up further away enough, so I went to Australia after that. So when I came back and it started the Irish Daily Star, I was actually coming back from Australia, so I really had been away altogether, I think about 7 or 8 years at that time, and I didn't know anyone in Dublin at all. I never even lived in Dublin, and it became one of those things of just applying for everything again. I actually initially, because even if you don't particularly want the job that you're applying for, you will get to meet people and other doors will open. So what actually happened to me was I applied for a job at buzz.ie, which is like part of the Irish Daily Star, that Talbot Street I&M kind of family. But I applied for a job there as a digital reporter or something. And when I went down for the interview, done the interview, and they were like, actually, we're going to bring someone else in if that's all right. And they brought the news editor, who was then Neil Leslie, I think he's at the Mirror now, but he came in and they were saying that he was actually looking for a freelancer, but for 5 days a week. So it worked out as a full-time job, and asked me, do you want to work at the Irish Daily Star instead? And I said, yeah, because I wasn't particularly married to the idea of buzz. I just wanted a job. It didn't really matter where I worked. So that kind of thing, I think, get like even jobs where you think you're just doing it for the money or whatever. Even when I went to Australia, I refused to give up on the journalism thing, even though I didn't know anyone. I went for so many interviews in Australia at the Herald Sun, like all the Murdoch papers, and was getting nowhere because I didn't know anyone, didn't really understand Australia. And eventually I got a job as the chief reporter for a magazine about trucks and lorries. And like, I don't know anything about trucks and lorries either, but I do now. But even if you can just get into a job where you're still using the skills, like still writing, still using your degree, I think, like, I've noticed some of my friends from university got into the kind of, I think it's a slippery slope. Like, they took jobs they didn't particularly want out of uni because they thought, I'll do this for a wee while and then I'll go back into writing or I'll go back into journalism. And I think it's so important to stay with your degree and just keep on writing, because eventually, you know, you never know what's going to happen. And I think like one of the best examples is Donny O'Sullivan. Donny was working in Stormont as a researcher, and then ended up at Storyful in Dublin. And through Storyful in Dublin, CNN came to him and said, do you want to come and work at CNN in America? We want your skills that you've honed in Storyful in when it came to like fact checking and all this kind of stuff. And he said, yeah, and now Donny is Donny from CNN. So it just shows you, like, I would just say stay in the jobs with writing and stuff, and don't take maybe a job in PR or something like that thinking you'll be able to come back. I just think if you can, just keep applying, because you never know who you're going to meet.
And just building off that as well, I have a few questions, but you can stop me whenever. But as like something that I found is, because I'm very close to graduating, and it's the expectation is that you'll do unpaid work, and I'm kind of like, living in Dublin's an expensive city. How did any of you juggle the financial side of things at the beginning, when it is just like the expectation is that you'll work for free for a while anyway?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if anybody. Oh, go on ahead, Shamim. Go on.
I just wanted to say, I basically worked like part-time jobs and all of that, you know, just any jobs, while I was doing like, well, I wasn't doing free work, I say, but what I was getting was like, I don't know, 150 euros for an article or less, you know. but sometimes you have to have a part-time job, but definitely, but don't go into a full-time job, you know, as Aoife said, don't go to a full-time related job like a PR job or a communication manager, social media manager, you know, because you wouldn't be able to go back from that. You definitely wouldn't be able to go back from that. I'm not saying you should go and take a part-time job you don't like, but you just have to, while you're doing it, you just have to sponsor yourself somehow, you know, sponsor your journalism career somehow to be able to stay in the game, but never take any full-time job that you can't come back from that, you know. Was that the bad advice? I feel like it was a bad advice. I don't know.
No, I don't think so. Just for what it's worth, Ian, like I think I would agree with what both Shamim and Aoife are saying on this. And it's not easy to hear it because it's not easy to do it when there's not a lot of money or any money coming in. I don't think you should be expected to work for free anywhere, but you may well be expected to work for buttons, you know, at the beginning. Or it may be doing a job, as Aoife says, that you don't particularly want to do, like me doing the social diary that I didn't particularly want to do. Or I don't know if you know Ruaidhrí McCormack from the Irish Times, or if you'd be aware of his work. But when I was in the Sunday Tribune, he was working as a sub-editor in the Sunday Tribune, which he didn't want to do at all. It'd be a very different aspect of journalism, you know, that he wouldn't have wanted to specialise in. But he was doing that until he could get his way into the job that he wanted to do. So I do think it's just, you keep searching until you find somewhere where you can get a foot in the door, and it might not be the perfect job, but it does open doors, you know, and you'll find that you'll have access to maybe a producer down the hallway, and you can say to them, look, I've got a podcast, you know, or an idea for a podcast, maybe a 6-part series, or whatever your idea is, but you need to sort of get in to do that. And look, if you don't get that job opportunity, then the other thing to do is, if you have a clear idea in your head as to what it is that you want to do, you start emailing people and asking to meet them for a quick coffee just about what it is that you'd like to do. And maybe if they're looking for contributors in a particular thing, for example, if it might be broadcast, you could be contributing items on different stuff. But it is all about picking up the phone, which is difficult, and having the conversations and saying, I'm here, hello. I mean, in between News Talk and RTE, I was I wasn't really unemployed. I was working in the Sunday, in Virgin Media doing the Sunday show, and I was doing a little bit of radio in RTE. But there were like months and months where I didn't have a whole lot on. And I was just picking up the phone, ringing people, going, can we meet for coffee? And then I was meeting them for coffee and saying, look, is there anything going? This is what I'm interested in. I was meeting, you know, independent production companies, talking about documentaries. And a lot of it didn't come to anything, but some of it did, you know, and it's not fun. And I didn't enjoy it, but it works. It does actually work, you know, but it's the hard yards part, like, really, unfortunately. And it's not for everyone. That's the problem. Like, it's like, I actually do think journalism is vocation because there's no money in it. For most people, there's no money in it, and the hours are shit. And, you know, there's very little thanks, and the public often don't like you. Like, if there's no glamour, like, there's not a lot to recommend it, except if you love it. And if you love it, it's amazing. Like, it's the best job you could possibly do if you love it, obviously. But do you know what I mean? Like, every day is different. You're often at the heart of stuff. You're bringing news to people that they've never heard before. There's a real buzz off it. You know what I mean? There's so much true. Like, if you love it, it's the best job in the world.
Can I just add something to that? Because something Sarah said reminded me of something. If you have an idea for a story, this is just something that happened recently to me, and that's why it came into my head. But a student FOI'd something, and they got a really good freedom of information, and the student wasn't a journalist. I don't even know if he's studying journalism, but he came to me and said, I have this really good freedom of information. Like, do you want to have it and you can do the story? And I said, yeah, no bother. Like, I took it off, and they took his hand and all off him. But me and him are constantly in contact now, and things like that. Like, as I said to him, you know, when stuff comes back, when after COVID, if you want to come into the Examiner and come in for a week or something, I'd be happy to take you. Everyone would be happy to take you. Like, if you can pitch like decent stories or stuff like that, people will remember you. And even if they don't use it that week or that story, if you just keep pitching and do news editors, they will eventually come on, because you'll eventually come on something that they will use in the paper. So that's something else I was just thinking.
So persistence, in a word.
Like persistent to the point of obnoxious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also have another question. I don't know if I'm taking up too much time, but
Yeah, fine.
so
Let's
if I continue
make this
with
the
some
last
more,
one, maybe. Yeah, go ahead.
well, it's kind of a different angle, but with regards like to reporting in the pandemic and everything, like Aoife, I read your story this morning actually about the far right and like how it's growing with the pandemic and everything. And yesterday I was watching The Late Late with Lindsay Bennett, and I tweeted out a quote from an old Examiner article actually that was not so complimentary about Dr. Tony Holohan. And I was saying it not like, it wasn't to criticize him as a doctor or anything, but just I thought it was interesting. And then a couple of kind of far right accounts that had a lot of racist stuff on their accounts kind of retweeted it. And so I actually ended up deleting it because I didn't feel comfortable. But I was wondering for you guys, like when you're being critical of the government in their response to the pandemic or anything, how do you balance the line between criticism and maybe undermining public health guidelines or the public health message? Or is that even something you think about?
No, absolutely. I think it's a really good question. And well, for me anyway, I don't have any straight answer. I think it's a constant balancing act because our job is to hold people in power to account and to ask hard questions. But you also have to be aware that genuinely there are human beings behind all of this. And for the most part, actually, politicians are doing their best for the most part. And the people in the health authorities and the HSE are doing their best for the most part. And there's not a whole lot of people who are lazy or incompetent or whatever. There are some, but there's not a whole lot. So you can't come to any of this reporting with the mindset that, you know, that you'd often hear in public discourse that politicians are only in for the money, or that, you know, the health service is like a complete shambles or whatever. You can't come to it with that mindset, I don't think, because I don't think that's reflective of the truth. So it's again about fairness in your head, I think, recognizing there's human beings behind this, recognizing that a lot of these human beings have got into the public service to be a public servant and actually do good, but sometimes they don't, and they get it wrong or they make wrong calls. And I think when you get your head straight on it, it informs your questioning. So hopefully your questioning isn't unfair, but at the same time rigorous. And that's what I try to do anyway, because I think you've really put your finger on something that's really important, particularly at the moment, that you're not constantly haranguing people or, as you say, undermining public health guidance or undermining trust in the government, unless there's a very valid reason to do that. And in some instances there is, you know, but you can't be doing it the whole time just because you think that that's what you should be doing, because that's not what you should be doing the whole time. You know, you need to make sure there's a valid reason for it. That's me.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think this notion that kind of came out in the pandemic from certain quarters that we all needed to pull on the green jersey. I do believe that everyone needs to work together in terms of COVID. I think the notion of telling journalists to pull on the green jersey when they're asking questions is incredibly dangerous. We got a lot of it during the pandemic. We're still getting it. And it really worries me. I think we saw, you know, over Christmas, with what the public health messages were, what the government did, and then what happened. There was a lot of criticism of the media then after Christmas, coming from mostly political circles, about, you know, the questions we were asking them about the public health message and going against the public health message. And I think politicians can seem really prickly at times, like they really, like, I think when you're watching it on TV or when Sarah's on the radio, when you hear the way sometimes a politician is replying to them, you think and to yourself, like, oh, they're so rude, or they're this or that. But as Sarah said, you know, as far as they're concerned, they have done their best. Like, they didn't do this on this, whatever the bad thing or the wrong thing was, they didn't do it on purpose. And it's human nature to be, you know, a bit defensive if you're trying to get your point across or whatever. I think with the pandemic, we've seen how important journalism is. We've seen people really are realizing that they need a free press. When it comes to the pandemic, we've seen, like, the amount of rumor, WhatsApp messages, fake leaflets, fake news stories, all of this, I think people are really realize how important the news media is, and I think you need to keep that in mind. I don't have any kind of issue with asking hard questions, and you know, if you're just asking a question, that's fair enough. I just get a wee bit worried sometimes where people, you know, they say this, oh, we all need to pull on the green jersey and like just let them at it, because governments have to be held to account, and that's why we need people like Sarah. And like, I think things like Sarah's, I know I'm like, whoa, Team Sarah, but I think things like Lifetime and things like doorsteps and press conferences with the media are essential, because if the government were really minded, they could just stop all that. They could send out press releases, they wouldn't have to take questions, you know, they could limit the number of people that could go to press conferences. And I think getting to hear from politicians, whether it's on Tonight Show, whether it's on Prime Time or whatever, because that's when you really see what they actually know. And we have seen in the last couple of months, once the message isn't being kind of put into a nice wee box, once the spotlight is on certain politicians, they don't know the answers. And it's up to us to ensure that they do, or that the public know that they don't. And yeah, I just think now in the pandemic, more than ever, we need to be asking hard questions.
Have any of you gotten any backlash from any politicians for your coverage during the pandemic? Just out of curiosity.
I notice, I think Sarah and Shamim could probably say this as well, we get more like the political stuff rather than the public health message stuff or the stuff about the pandemic. They don't take that personally, but like if you do a certain story about, say, this is just hypothetical, but say you do a certain story about Fianna Fáil, what's common then is they will send you a negative story about Fine Gael or Sinn Féin and say, why aren't you covering this? Like, oh, you'll cover all our bad stuff, but do not cover this. And that goes party, like the Shinners do it, like the Greens do it, everybody does it. But the actual public health thing, they don't take that as personally. It's the party stuff that they would say, oh, why don't you give us a really hard time? That kind of thing. That's in my experience anyway.
Okay, yeah, those are some fantastic questions, Ian. Thanks for sending them in, and we got some fantastic answers. If anyone else has any questions, be sure to either put your hand up or get them in now, you know, because we'll be finishing up quite soon. I actually have a question that, like, based on like a lot of what you just said, like the idea of that they're, you know, that they're like people, you know, are like more attuned to like what they're reading nowadays. Like you have a lot of people reading articles and like quoting from sources that might not be, you know, the most reliable. And obviously, like in today's like society, social media has become like this vacuum chamber for like different opinions and different like ideas. And a lot of that can be quite negative, and like can also be, you know, it can undermine like government advice. It can undermine the, you know, public health advice, and that is a real challenge, you know, facing the industry today. So I guess my question would be like, do you think that we need to like be like trying to encourage like a development of some what levels of media literacy in people from, you know, like where it be like from a school, like from when they're in school? Because like at the moment it just seems that like a lot of people aren't, you know, aren't vetting their sources and aren't vetting, you know, where they're getting their information and where they're reading it from. And then you get, you know, like you were talking about, for the rise of the far right and, you know, QAnon and all of these things, that just causes like a big hassle for, you know, journalists, for like people in the government and people, you know, in public health sectors. So like, yeah, like, do you think we should be encouraging like media literacy classes, things like that?
I think Shamim should answer, just because she does so much immigration stuff, and I think this is where people
yeah sure
really use media literacy, so she probably knows better than me, actually.
Yeah, I think you're right that it's important for the government bodies, all of them, to actively warn about fake news and be very quick, I feel like, to debunk dangerous conspiracy theories and just correct harmful inaccuracies. Perhaps I think the government can run even TV advertisements and warn people about the toxic impact of fake news. Like we had the George and Cancho stuff that were going around about criminal record that he had. And I feel like the Gardaí was a bit slow in kind of releasing a statement and say, look, this is not true. But it is important for them to be quick in debunking inaccuracies that are so harmful. We saw that the whole thing kind of created kind of a dangerous and contentious atmosphere. And when I was talking to people who were George's friends or family, or people, just Black people in Ireland, I feel like it really broke their heart to see their friends sharing it, the memes. And I feel if the Gardaí was quick enough, that wouldn't have happened. So I think it comes from the higher up the state. The state has the power to kind of influence and tackle fake news. I think they can warn. They can also use their social media platforms to constantly tell people about the dangers of fake news and conspiracy theories. And as you said, it would be excellent if we could start teaching media literacy to children from a very young age in schools and putting it into the curriculum. I think it's easier to teach children rather than influencing fully fledged ideas of adults. There's a line, my favorite book, it's called On the Road by Jack Kerouac. It says, it's hard to teach the old maestro a new tune, so it's really easier to influence children. So yeah, I believe that the state should allocate more resources to fighting fake news and inaccuracies.
Yeah, I think like this definitely has to be obviously parents can do, some can do helping somewhat, encourage, kids to read more broadly, but I think this definitely needs to be like an initiative, that comes from the top down, because people clearly some things have been tried, they're just not working, and I think there needs to be more focus and more resources given to educating people about what they're reading, who they're reading, where the sources are coming from. Otherwise we're going to be in a big mess, that's for sure. You mentioned the George Nchenko case, which is an absolute disgrace and tragedy just before Christmas, and it was just terrible to see, like you said, some of the stuff that was coming out of about him was just disgusting. But covering those kind of high profile events and controversies, that must be really difficult to report on, whilst also trying to remain objective. So for one of the last questions today, how would you go about positioning yourself when you write about sensitive topics like that, or say the Mosney hunger strike that were going on over the past week, or any political controversy or tragedy? How would you position yourself best to write about that?
I might take that. Because we've talked a lot about objectivity and how important that is, and obviously it's sort of key tenet of journalism. But I think there are some stories that you have to get into, and you have to immerse yourself in to really do them justice. So particularly topics, human interest, I suppose, is how it would be referred to. Topics about people's lives, or very difficult emotional topics. I think you need to, firstly, when I say immerse yourself, you need to get out there. This isn't to pick up the phone. Well, I mean, lockdown, obviously, you have to pick up the phone. But in ordinary times, this really applies to any story, but particularly when it comes to sensitive topics, or where there's, people's lives have been very, very dramatically changed by an event. You need to get out there on the ground and meet people. Picking up the phone doesn't cut it. It is about wearing out the shoe leather, knocking on doors, talking to people, getting into the story. You will spot it a mile away if you send two reporters onto a story, and one of them, does all their reporting from the office, and the other one is out and about and talking to people. You'll spot it a mile away in the finished product, because it makes all the difference. So I think that would be the first thing for me, is to go get into the story, and then you can let your emotions get into it. I think when there's no risk of a lack of objectivity affecting the truth, and maybe that's a bit of an oxymoron, but I think there are some instances where you can just be on the side of your subject, where that's okay. and that's not going to necessarily affect the truth. It's just going to tell the story in a compassionate way. And I think sometimes you need to do that, but you need to use your judgment as to when those occasions are acceptable.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, like I think the most recent one that everyone can relate to is the mother and baby homes. I think that was like such an emotional story, and you know, covering that story, I am quite open. I'm a crier. Like when it's like required, I don't just cry at work or whatever. But for instance, I cried in front of the Taoiseach when Lyra McKee got shot. I cried reading the Mother and Baby Homes report. So there's no point pretending, I think, to be something you're not, and things like that. Look at the Mother and Baby Homes, for instance. These are people that have not been listened to for an incredibly long time. And when you read that report, the report is there with their testimony of, and this is a commission investigation, so you can read what actually happened in those homes. You're allowed to be emotional and you're allowed to say this is wrong, because by anybody's stretch, what happened in the Mother and Baby Homes was wrong. So I think that's kind of like the perfect example of what Sarah means, is like sometimes you can just be on the side of someone because by anybody's stretch, what happened to these people was wrong. So I think the main thing I always try and remember, and like there are certain instances, especially if you come from a certain background, or even if you're a woman, like women are going to report on things like cervical check different, because that could actually happen to us. It could happen to my mommy, it could happen to any of us. But you always need to remember at the end of it that it's not about you. I think you can kind of tell. It's not so much in Ireland, I've noticed it, but definitely in English newspapers and English journalists, you can kind of tell when the person has kind of made this, not even made the story about them, but they feel really involved in the story. I think it really shows in their work. It's not something we really do here. I think we would call it notions, but it's really obvious. And I think, you know, there's certain instances. I've covered the Stardust justice campaign quite closely, and I'm like quite close to a lot of the families and survivors, and it can be, I'm like heading now into the inquest is going to be quite hard, because obviously I know these people quite well, but at the end of the day, like when I'm doing the work, I just kind of need to remember that it's not actually about me. You know, I am not, don't play any part in this whatsoever. So you're allowed to be emotional, but it's as long as the emotion doesn't cloud your judgment or cloud your reporting, I think that's, it's totally fair enough, like Sarah said.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I cut you off.
No, you didn't. I think they said it. Aoife and Sarah said it good. I don't have much to add, really.
Well, we're coming up to the hour now, so I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions. But we do have another panel ready to kick off in a few minutes. But I want to say thank you to our fantastic lineup of speakers for donating their time to us to come and speak to our, you know, student journalists today. It was lovely to hear from you, and lovely to get to hear, you know, about your experiences and your thoughts and your like everything you've learned from, you know, your career in the industry. And hopefully one day we'll see people, you know, who were listening here, you know, will take something away and be able to, use it to develop their own careers. So thank you very much for attending today. And
thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Bye.
And have a lovely afternoon.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.